Hey there, it is Matt. How are you? And today I want to talk about the thing that everybody in Japan's content production industry is talking about, the potential merger of two titans, Sony on one hand and Kadokawa on the other. This is one of the most interesting things to happen in the Japanese fantasy industrial complex in a really long time. And if it goes down, it has very real implications for the way that pop culture is going to be produced in Japan and consumed all around the world. So let me break it down for you as to why this is important and how it might play out. So, Sony last week announced its intention to purchase Kadokawa and make it a subsidiary company. You know Sony, of course. It's the consumer electronics titan of the 20th century that made consumer electronics more than just appliances. It made them into fashions with things like the Walkman and the Sony PlayStation. You might not know Kadokawa as well, but they are an absolute powerhouse of content here in Japan. They were founded at roughly the same time Sony was in the 1940s time frame, I believe, late 1940s time frame. And for all this time, they had been producing huge amounts of mainly books. They started out as a publisher, but then in the 80s, the son of the founder took over and pushed the company in a new direction of turning its best-selling books into even bigger blockbuster movies. And this idea that you start with a hit book and turn it into a hit movie, and the movie spurs sales of the book and vice versa, it was really pioneering at the time in the mid-late 1970s. And it resulted in the creation of a lot of really big franchises here in Japan. And people now know this strategy as the media mix. You see the media mix a lot in anime, where you have not only the cartoon, but toys, records, soundtracks, books, novelizations, all sorts of cross-platform branding of stuff. But that was really pioneered by Kadokawa in the 1970s and early 1980s to great effect. And Kadokawa is a really, really big company with a lot of IP under its belt. And this is exactly why Sony wants to acquire them. Sony used to be an electronics titan, but in the 21st century, it pivoted away from that because all of that manufacturing had been outsourced, offshored to places like China and Korea, and pivoted into content distribution through things like record labels, movie studios, its PlayStation network. It acquired several anime studios and anime production companies, most famously Aniplex. And then a few years back, it made headlines when Sony paid $1.2 billion US dollars to acquire Crunchyroll, which is the world's biggest anime streaming service. So Sony has this incredible pipeline for making and transmitting or broadcasting or streaming content, but it has an Achilles heel, which is that it doesn't have any way to easily generate content or originate it. That's where Kadokawa comes in. By some estimates, Kadokawa has 100,000 novels, books, manga in its library, and it's producing up to 5,000 to 6,000 new titles every year in the last few years, and it's only ramping that up. So Kadokawa is a real powerhouse when it comes to content. And you know Kadokawa's content. It actually has a lot of hits under its belt. In the manga and anime sphere, there's stuff like Sword Art Online, there's Delicious in Dungeon, there's Oshinoko. Those are all the products of Kadokawa manga or light novels and anime studios. And it also owns From Software, which is the creator of the Elden Ring and that whole series of games, which are major, major, major hits, not just in the game industry, but also culturally. I mean, to the point where the director of Elden Ring got a profile in the New Yorker. This is not something that usually happens to Japanese video game directors, and it just goes to show you what a critically acclaimed hit Elden Ring was. So, Kadokawa has all of this content. Sony has this pipeline. It seems like chocolate and peanut butter. We don't know if it's going through, but it's not a hostile takeover. Both sides are very friendly. They've already been collaborating in the past, so it looks pretty likely that it might happen. So if it does, what are the implications for the industry? Well, they're manyfold, and we won't 100% know until years after this happens, but we can make some predictions. One issue with the anime industry today is that it is clogged. It is not capable of keeping up with the increasing foreign demand for Japanese entertainment, and anime in particular. There's several reasons for this. One is that there is a shortage of manpower, people power. There's a lot of women working in the anime industry too. Animators are traditionally, unfortunately, very poorly paid. The working conditions are bad, like it's mostly like pickup work, like it's not full-time employment. The hours are long. It's really hard on the body to be like drawing, sitting in that position, drawing for a long period of time. So there's a lot of burnout and stuff. So it's tough to actually make enough animation with the amount of people that they have on the ground here in Japan. Adding to this is that the way anime is traditionally produced in Japan is through this kind of peculiar system known as the production committee. Production committees are consortiums of various independent businesses that get together to share in the costs of producing an anime to reduce the risk, because it's a very risky thing. Not every anime is going to be a hit. In fact, most aren't. So, when one doesn't do well, you don't want to be wiped out by it. And these production consortiums, production committees help ease that. The problem is that they're very insular, they're very conservative, they're not really open to any kind of outside people coming in. So it's the same groups of people sitting in the same proverbial smoke-filled rooms, divvying up like who gets what from a production and who does what and what gets made. So it's a really inefficient process. So the combination of the lack of animators currently and this inefficient process means that it takes a really long time to make an anime. Like, even if you have the money, even if you have the full funding for an anime, it will take at least 3 years to slot it in because the anime studios in Japan are so jammed up. So this is a really big problem. But the Sony-Kadokawa merger might actually address this, because by merging, Sony would have access to the full pipeline of being able to create content, of being able to produce it, animate it, and distribute it all through its own company. It wouldn't have to negotiate with other people. It wouldn't have to use a traditional production committee system to get the stuff made. The downside of this is that between the two of them, Sony and Kadokawa control like 1/3 of all anime production annually. So right now, because they're not merged, they work with a lot of different companies. They're on different production committees and things like that. But if they merge and become a singular company, they would probably shut rivals out of their production pipeline. Like, for instance, right now, Sony's Aniplex produces Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer is huge. I mean, you've probably heard of it. It was like the #1 grossing movie in 2021. And it's just a major, major manga and anime hit. That came out of a company called Shueisha. Shueisha is very much a rival of Kadokawa. So it's easy to imagine a future where Sony and Kadokawa get together and then they're shutting out other now rival companies. So will that make it actually harder for non-Sony Kadokawa companies to get their content produced? Maybe. Another question is whether this will make anime production more corporate. And that seems like a little bit of a weird question, because of course companies have always been producing anime. You have to be a company. It's not like somebody paying this out of pocket. But what I mean by that is Sony and Kadokawa are publicly owned companies. They issue stock. They have stockholders, stakeholders. They have people exerting pressure on them to turn profits. But most of the big Japanese content powerhouses, Shueisha, Shogakukan, Akita Shoten, Kodansha, they're family run. Okay, they don't have shareholders who they have to please, so they can take a more nuanced, longer, range approach to producing content. And this is really important because the #1 factor in producing hits in the manga world, which are the hits that become the next anime, isn't money, it's time. You need a lot of time to go through a lot of trial and error, a lot of artists, and to find the titles that are going to really stick and like hit with the zeitgeist, right? And even when you do find those titles, it's not always guaranteed that that same creator is going to either quickly ramp up to be able to, like, the next Demon Slayer, or be able to repeat it once that series ends. So, like, in essence, they're making a situation where it's easy for lightning to strike. You have to wait for lightning to strike. You know, it's not that you can just dump money in and suddenly create the next genius mangaka out there. It takes time to grow them, but time isn't something that shareholders really like. They want to get quick returns on their investments. So when Sony and Kadokawa come together and start controlling 1/3 of all anime production, is anime going to get less adventurous? Is it going to be more profit-driven? It's a possibility. We don't know. We're actually not going to know how this plays out for quite a few years after it happens, if it happens, because it takes that much time to go through production cycles. But it has the ability to really transform the playing field here in Japan. And we're already seeing that happening. Because of those production logjams, Toho, who you know because they make the Godzilla movies, among many other things, bought Science Saru and also the G-Kids distribution company in North America this year. They're trying to go toe-to-toe with what this Sony-Kadokawa conglomerate merger would be. So this is causing a big shakeup in the industry. And, you know, Sony, Kadokawa, Toho, these are big players. They're making most of the content that's coming out there. So depending on how this plays out, we could see a very different playing field in a couple years. I'm going to be watching it closely, but this is really, literally, all anybody in the Japanese anime and content production industry is talking about right now. It's a developing issue. Hopefully we'll know more in the near future about whether the merger goes through and when it does, what the details are. And when that happens, I will be back to talk to you about it and share with you my thoughts. In the meantime, I can tell you, I think that this might be a good thing because the production pipeline is pretty messed up in Japan when it comes to making anime, and it could use a little bit more efficiency. But I hope it doesn't get too efficient, because I think the inefficiency actually makes for a lot of weirdness, and I want to keep anime weird. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, share, comment, all that good stuff. You know how it goes on these YouTube channels. I always enjoy talking to you. I want to bring more of this kind of content to you in the future. And thanks again. I really appreciate you spending this much time listening to what I have to say. See you next time.